A girl chained between two mules in an auction yard looked up at a cowboy she'd never met and said 5 words that split his life clean in half. Don't buy the horse. Choose me. He had $43 to his name. The horse would save his ranch. The, the girl would cost him everything. He chose the girl. And what happened next on a broken ranch in Wyoming, with no rifle, no money, and a man coming to burn it all down is a story you won't be able to stop listening to. She stood on the porch in firelight with a hatchet across her knees and her eyes fixed on the darkness to the east. Behind her, the barn was burning, orange and black and roaring, throwing sparks into a sky that had no moon. The heat reached her face from 40 yards away, and she did not flinch. She had stopped flinching 3 years ago when flinching only made it worse. A voice came out of the dark, low, familiar. The voice that had owned every room she had ever been locked inside. Come home, girl. You belong to me. Letta did not step back. She did not lower the hatchet. She looked straight into the black space between the firelight and the road where that voice lived, and she said one word. No, one syllable, 2 letters, but it carried the weight of 3 years of silence behind it. 3 years of yes, sir, and please don't, and I'm sorry. 3 years of swallowed screams and bitten tongues, and the taste of blood from keeping quiet when everything inside her was howling. No, but to understand why that word split the night open like an axe through kindling, we need to go back. 2 days. To an auction yard where flies gathered on a girl's bare feet, and a cowboy in a blue work shirt beneath a brown leather vest made a choice that cost him everything he had left in this world. This is the story of a woman who was sold like livestock by a man who called himself her family, who was chained between mules in a trading post yard while men walked past and saw lumber, who stood on a bridge once and chose to live not because she wanted to, but because dying meant he won. In the next hour and a half, you will watch her go from a girl on her knees in auction dirt to a woman standing upright with a weapon in her hand and a word in her mouth that no one had ever let her say. And beside her, through every mile of it, a cowboy who gave up the last thing he owned, his dead brother's rifle, not to buy her, but to open a door she could walk through on her own. This is their story, and it begins in the heat. Wyoming Territory, July 1886. The kind of heat that cooks the ground white and makes the air shimmer like something broken. The kind of heat that kills horses and dries creeks to nothing and turns men into the worst versions of themselves because suffering does that. It peels back the paint and shows you what's underneath. Silas Harrow rode south on a lame mare through 14 miles of that heat with $43 to his name, 18 in coin, the rest in the rifle on his back. A Winchester model 1873 with a notch on the stock his younger brother Jesse had carved the morning before Antietam 24 years ago. Jesse was 17. He carved his initials with a pocket knife, laughing, saying he wanted the gun to remember him in case the Confederates didn't. The Confederates remembered him just fine. Silas had carried that rifle through every winter since, through the war, through the silence after, through 14 years of ranching alone in Black Hollow Valley, where the land was cheap because nobody in their right mind wanted it. The soil was thin, the creek ran low half the year and froze the other half. The wind came off the northern ridge like it had a personal grudge against anything standing upright. But Silas stayed. Not because the land was good, because the land didn't ask questions. It didn't look at him with pity or curiosity or the careful distance people keep from a man who came back from a war missing something you can't see. He stayed because silence was easier than explaining what he'd lost in a cornfield in Maryland on September 17, 1862, when the smoke was so thick you couldn't see 10 feet and his brother's mouth was moving, but nothing was coming out. Now the ranch was dying. His last draft horse had gone down with colic 6 days ago. Fences needed mending. Creek was dropping. Hay wasn't cut. And a man without a working horse in 1886 Wyoming was a man counting the days until the land swallowed him whole. So he rode his limping mare south to Doyle Pruitt's trading post. Because Pruitt was the only man within 40 miles who sold horses Silas could almost afford. He wore a blue work shirt faded at the elbows and dark with sweat between the shoulder blades beneath a brown leather vest that had been his father's. The vest was cracked along the left side where a Confederate bayonet had caught it at Sharpsburg and missed the skin beneath by the width of a prayer. Silas kept it for the same reason he kept the rifle. Not because it was useful, because it was evidence. Proof that he had been somewhere and survived it, even if surviving was just another word for not dying yet. He tied the mare to the rail outside Pruitt's trading post and stepped inside. The interior was dark after the white glare of the yard. It smelled like tobacco and leather and something underneath both of those things that was probably rat. Doyle Pruitt was behind the counter weighing tobacco on a brass scale. He didn't look up. Harrow, you look worse than last time. I need a horse. Everybody needs something. Pruitt set down the tobacco. He was a thick man with small eyes and hands that moved with the careful precision of someone who counted everything twice and trusted nothing he couldn't weigh. Got two out back. Bay gelding, strong, no problems. $35. And a mare with a bad hock, I'll let go for 20. I got 18 cash and a Winchester. Pruitt's eyes changed. Something moved behind them. Interest. The kind of interest that has teeth. That the 73, yeah, Jesse's rifle. Silas didn't answer. He set the Winchester on the counter. The wood was warm from his back. The notch caught the light from the window. Two crooked letters. J.H. Jesse Harrow. Carved by a boy who was laughing when he did it. Pruitt ran his thumb over the initials the way a man touches a thing he intends to own. I'll take it for the bay. 18 in the rifle. Done. But then Pruitt leaned across the counter and his voice dropped half a register into something that was trying to sound casual and failing. Come out back first. I got something else you ought to see. I ain't on here for anything else. Just come look, Harrow. 2 minutes. Silas followed him through the back door into the auction yard. 3 mules stood in the corner near a water trough with green scum on the surface. A rooster scratched at the dirt. The heat was worse out here, reflecting off the hard-packed ground like a second sun pushing up from below. And chained to the fence post between the mules sitting with her knees pulled tight to her chest was a girl. Silas stopped. She was young, 19 at most, dress torn at the collar, stained dark with sweat, and something else. Something brown and dried that was old blood. Her hair hung across her face. One wrist was rubbed raw where the iron shackle sat skin peeling back in a wet pink strip. Flies landed on her bare feet, and she did not swat them. She did not move at all. She sat the way a person sits when moving has only ever made things worse. 3 men stood near the far fence talking low. One of them glanced at the girl, then went back to his conversation. Like she was part of the fence, like she was lumber. Pruitt spoke the way a man talks about livestock he's trying to move before it costs him feed. Came in 2 days ago. A man named Virgil Crane brought her. Owed me $60. Opium mostly. Couldn't pay. Offered her instead. You took a human being for an opium debt. I took what was offered. That's commerce. That ain't commerce. Pruitt held up one finger. The gesture of a man who has rehearsed his defense. I didn't chain her. I didn't hit her. I didn't do whatever put that bruise on her neck. I just ain't the one who unchained her. And if you're fixing to lecture me about morality, Harrow, you can walk right back to your dying ranch and starve righteous. Silas looked at the girl. She still hadn't moved, hadn't looked up. Her breathing was shallow, controlled. The kind of breathing a person learns when being noticed means being hurt. Then he saw her hands. 2 fingers on her left hand were crooked, healed wrong, broken and never set. And on the inside of her right forearm, just above the shackle, a row of small round scars. Uniform. Deliberate. 7 circles running from her inner wrist to her elbow, evenly spaced, each one the exact diameter of a cigar tip. Whoever had done this had taken their time. Silas felt his jaw lock so tight his teeth ached. The muscles in his neck went rigid. Something old and hot moved through his chest. Not anger. Anger is what you feel when someone cuts in front of you at the general store. This was something deeper. Something that lived in the same place where the memory of Jesse's silent mouth in the cornfield smoke lived. The place where a man keeps the things that changed him. What do you want for her? He hated the words before they finished leaving his mouth. Hated that they made sense in this yard, in this territory, in this version of the world where a man could ask that question about a person and the only response was a price. Pruitt shrugged. 20. She's skinny, but she works. Can cook supposedly. Quiet. I already gave you the 18 and the rifle for the horse. Pruitt smiled. The kind of smile that belongs on an animal that's cornered something. So pick one. Horse or the girl? The horse would save his ranch. The horse was the smart choice. The horse was survival. Without it, the fences would rot, and the hay would go uncut, and the creek would drop, and by winter, Silas Harrow would be another name scratched off the territory map. A man who tried and failed and left nothing behind but a cabin with a sagging roof and a corral with 6 broken rails. He looked at the bay through the barn slat, strong, healthy, ready to work. He looked at the girl. Give me the girl. Keep the horse. Pruitt blinked. The smile died. You came here for a horse, Harrow. I know what I came here for. You're going to walk home with no horse, no rifle, no money, and a half-starved girl who ain't going to save your ranch. The key, Pruitt. Pruitt stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, short and ugly like a dog bark, a sound that had no humor in it and wasn't trying to. Your funeral. He tossed a small iron key. Silas caught it left-handed. He walked toward the girl. Slow, hands open where she could see them. He stopped 3 feet away and knelt in the dirt so his eyes were level with hers. I'm going to unlock this chain. That's all. Nothing else. No answer. But her breathing changed, just slightly, faster. She was listening. He reached for the shackle. The lock was crude, a simple pin mechanism. The key turned rough and the chain dropped into the dirt with a sound like a dead thing hitting stone. She pulled her wrist to her chest and held it against her ribs. The raw skin wept clear fluid. She made no sound. Silas stood, took 2 full steps back, gave her the distance she needed to feel something other than cornered. Can you stand? She nodded once. My mare's out front. She'll carry you. Then the girl looked up. Pale gray eyes, steady, dry, no tears, no gratitude, no softening. Just a flat, hard calculation. The kind of look that takes measurements. She was reading his hands, his stance, the distance between them, the distance to the gate. She was figuring out what kind of man spends everything he has on a stranger and then steps back instead of forward. Where she said, my ranch, 8 miles north. What do you want me to do there? Whatever you want. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not trust, not suspicion either. Something between those 2 things, like she'd braced for a blow and caught air instead and didn't know what to do with the absence. That ain't how this works, she said. It is now. She stood, taller than he expected, thin, the kind of thin that meant weeks of not enough. But she stood straight. She didn't wobble. She didn't reach for support. She stood the way a person stands when standing is an act of defiance, and she'd been defying things longer than he knew. She kept her eyes on his hands. They walked through the trading post. The 3 men by the fence stopped talking and watched. One of them, a heavy man in a sweat-stained hat with small eyes, and a jaw that looked like it had been broken and reset crooked, leaned toward his companion and said loud enough to carry across the yard, Harrow bought himself a girl. Ain't that something? Silas kept walking. Letta kept walking. Bet she don't last a week, another voice. Virgil'll come collect. He always does. Letta's shoulders tightened, just barely, just enough that Silas noticed and filed it away in the part of his brain that tracked threats. Outside, the heat hit like a hand pressed flat against the face. Silas helped her onto the mare. She mounted easy. She'd ridden before. She gripped the saddle horn with her good hand and pressed the wounded wrist against her stomach. Her jaw was set. Pruitt stood in the doorway, already cleaning the Winchester with a rag, already polishing his new possession the way a man polishes a coin he stole. Hey, Harrow. Silas didn't turn. Virgil Crane's going to come looking. You know that. Let him. He's got friends. The Slade boys run with him, 3 of them. And Virgil, he don't just want his property back when somebody takes it. Pruitt paused. His voice carried the particular pleasure of a man delivering bad news he finds entertaining. He wants to make a lesson. Silas took the reins and started walking north. Behind them, still inside the yard, the heavy man in the sweat-stained hat was mounting his horse and riding east, toward the Crane claim. Letta saw it. She saw the man's face, and she saw the direction he rode, and she saw the dust his horse kicked up, heading east, and she understood exactly what it meant. She said nothing. She said nothing because she needed to know what Silas Harrow was made of when the ground shifted beneath him without warning. 3 years with Virgil Crane had taught her that every man is decent when he chooses to be. The question is what they become when the choice is taken away. When the thing they didn't plan for arrives in the dark and the mask comes off, and underneath it is either a man or something wearing a man's shape, she would watch, she would wait, and she would know. They walked a mile before either of them spoke. The road north was rutted dirt between sagebrush flats. Grasshoppers cracked out of the weeds. The sun was straight overhead and brutal about it. "What's your name?" she asked. "Silas Harrow." "I'm Letta." She didn't give her last name. He didn't ask. Another quarter mile of silence. Then Letta spoke again. Her voice was even, factual, the voice of someone delivering intelligence, not making conversation. "Those men at the trading post. The one in the dirty hat, he was riding east." Silas kept walking. His hand found the empty space on his back where the Winchester used to ride. Muscle memory reaching for a ghost. "Yeah, east is where Virgil lives." Silas nodded. His hand dropped from his back. The gun was gone. He had a skinning knife on his belt and nothing else. How far is his claim? Maybe 9-10 miles east of Pruitt's place. How long before he comes? Letta was quiet a moment. Not hesitating. Calculating. Depends how drunk he is. Sober tonight. On the pipe, maybe 2 days. But he'll come, Silas. He always comes back for what he thinks is his. You ain't his. I know that. He don't. The ranch came into view past a low ridge. A cabin with a door that hung slightly off-center. A barn with a sag in the roof. A corral fence broken in 6 places. A creek running low along the south side. 3 chickens in the yard. Letta looked at it for a long time. "This yours?" "What's left of it. It's quiet, yeah." Virgil's place was never quiet. Something was always breaking. Someone was always yelling. Dogs barking. Bottles smashing. She paused. Her voice did something it hadn't done before. It softened at the edges. Not weakness. Remembering. I forgot what quiet sounded like. Silas helped her down. She winced when her bare feet hit the hot ground, but said nothing about it. Pain was something she had learned to file away, and she filed it now with the efficiency of long practice. He pointed at the cabin. "Bed's inside, it's yours. I sleep in the barn." She looked at him sharp, the gray eyes narrowing, running the calculation again. "You gave up $30 and your brother's rifle, and you're sleeping in the barn." "I didn't give it up for you, I gave it up to get you out." "There's a difference," she stared at him. He could feel her measuring that sentence the way a carpenter measures a beam, checking it for warp, for rot, for the hidden weakness that would make it snap under weight. "What if I leave in the night?" she said. "Then you leave. You won't come after me." "No, why not?" "Because you ain't mine, Letta. You ain't anyone's. That's the whole point." She stood there in the afternoon heat, barefoot, wrist bleeding through the raw skin, dress torn. 2 broken fingers on her left hand curled at him angles that made his stomach tighten every time he saw them. And in her eyes, the careful, exhausting vigilance of a person who has learned that the ground can open beneath you at any second, and the only thing to do is stand still and wait for it. "Silas, yeah, if you're lying, if this is just a slower kind of cage, I will burn this cabin to ash while you sleep. I ain't saying that to scare you. I'm saying it so we're honest." He looked at her. 19 years old, starved thin, burned, broken, eyes like winter slate, and not 1 ounce of quit anywhere in her body. "That's fair," he said. She walked inside. The door was open, no lock, no bolt, no bar. Afternoon sun threw a stripe of gold across the floor. Silas went to the barn. He unsaddled the mare, hung the bridle on a nail, and stood in the doorway looking north toward nothing. No rifle, no money, no horse that could work. Fence broken, hay uncut, creek dropping. And somewhere east, a man named Virgil Crane was about to find out that the girl he'd sold like a sack of feed had been taken by a broke cowboy in a leather vest, with a bad back and a skinning knife. "What have you done, you fool?" he said to the empty barn. But he already knew. He'd done the only thing Jesse would have expected of him, the only thing his mother would have recognized, the only thing that separated him from every other man in that auction yard who looked at a girl in chains and saw lumber. Night came slow. The heat didn't break so much as retreat to a tolerable cruelty. Silas built no fire. A fire would be visible from the east road, and until he knew what was coming on that road, darkness was an ally. He sat on a hay bale with the skinning knife on his knee and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Chickens, creak, wind through a crack in the barn wall, and from inside the cabin the sound of someone checking the door. Not opening it, not closing it, just touching it, confirming it was still there, confirming it was still unlocked. She checked it 3 times in the first hour. By the second hour, the checking stopped. Silas didn't know if that meant she trusted the door or trusted him, or had simply run out of energy for vigilance. He suspected the third. Sometime near midnight, she appeared on the porch. He saw her shape in the starlight. She sat on the step with her back against the post and her knees drawn up. She didn't call out to him. She just sat there looking east down the dark road. After a while, Silas walked from the barn and sat on the ground near the porch. Not on the step, not close. 10 feet between them. Enough distance that she could breathe without feeling watched. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence between two people who understood that words cost something and you didn't spend them without cause. Then Letta spoke. Quiet, steady. Looking at the road, not at him. You lost someone in the war. My brother, Jesse, Antietam. He was 17. 17. She was quiet again, processing that number. 17, 1 year younger than she'd been when Virgil Crane walked into her room and said she belonged to him. My stepdaddy died when I was 16, she said. Heart gave out, or that's what they told the doctor. Virgil was his brother, my step-uncle, lived in the back cabin on the same claim. Next morning he walked into my room and said I was his now. Said it like he was reading a bill of sale, like my daddy's death transferred the deed. Silas said nothing. Some things didn't need a response. They needed a witness. First time I tried to run, Letta said he broke 2 of my fingers, said it was a lesson. Second time he burned me. She held up her arm. The starlight caught the scars. 7 circles, neat and deliberate, running up the pale skin of her forearm like a record of patience and cruelty, measured out in equal portions. Third time I didn't run. I walked to Harlan Bridge and stood on the rail. Silas went very still. I stood there a long time, she said. Water was moving fast. Cold. It would have been quick, probably. She picked at the edge of the bandage on her wrist. Her voice was flat, the way a person talks about a wound that's scarred over. The pain is still there, but the bleeding stopped long enough ago that describing it doesn't reopen it. I didn't jump, not because I wanted to live, because I thought if I die, he wins. He gets to say I was nothing, that I broke. And I wanted to outlast him. I wanted to be the thing he couldn't finish. She looked at him for the first time since she'd sat down. You carried your brother's rifle for 24 years. You gave it up yesterday for a girl you never met. Why? Because I looked at you and saw Jesse. That stopped her. She blinked. Not your face, Silas said. Not your age. Your eyes. Jesse had that same look in the cornfield when the line broke. Not scared. Not brave either. Just refusing. Refusing to be the thing that somebody else decided he was. A casualty. A number. A body in the dirt. He paused. He died anyway, but he died refusing. Letta looked at the dark road. A coyote called from somewhere near the creek. Another answered from farther away, and the distance between those 2 sounds was the loneliest thing in Wyoming. Silas. Yeah. If Virgil comes tonight, what's your plan? I got a skinning knife and bad intentions. That ain't a plan, that's a prayer. I've gotten by on worse. Something moved across her face, not a smile, the ghost of one. The muscle memory of what laughing used to feel like before laughing became dangerous. You're funny for a man who sleeps in a barn. You're calm for a woman who just got unchained from a fence post. I've been calm for 3 years. Calm is how you survive a man like Virgil. You stay quiet, you stay small, you study the bars of the cage until you know every one of them by heart. Her voice hardened. I know his patterns, Silas. I know how he moves, who he sends, what he does when he's angry, and what he does when he's scared. I know the Slade brothers. Emmett is the talker. Rufus is the dangerous one. Otis folds if you push him. I know that Virgil never goes first. He sends men ahead and watches from behind. She turned her gray eyes on him. I know all of this because when you can't get out of a cage, you memorize every bar. The east road stayed dark. No dust cloud, no rider, no sound except the creek and the coyotes and the wind. Letta pulled the thin blanket she'd brought from the cabin around her shoulders and sat with her back against the porch post. Her eyes didn't close. Neither did his. They sat like that until the stars shifted overhead and the air cooled just enough to feel like mercy. Two people in the dark, one with a knife, one with nothing but the knowledge of her enemy and the stubborn, furious refusal to let that enemy write the last page of her story. And on the east road 10 miles away, a man in a sweat-stained hat was knocking on a door and telling Virgil Crane the news. The girl was gone. A cowboy took her, a broke rancher in a blue shirt and brown vest who traded a dead boy's rifle for a living girl and walked her north like it was the most natural thing in the world. Virgil Crane listened. He did not shout. He did not throw anything. He sat very still in his chair, and the opium pipe in his hand trembled once, and his eyes did something that the man in the sweat-stained hat had seen before and wished he hadn't. They went empty, flat, like windows into a room where the lamp just blew out. Then Virgil smiled, the worst kind of smile. The kind that has no warmth and no humor and no connection to anything a person would recognize as human feeling. "Get the Slades," he said. All three, and bring rope." The man in the hat left quickly. He did not look back. He did not want to see what Virgil Crane's face was doing in the dark of that cabin with the boarded windows and the locked doors in the room at the end of the hall where a girl had lived for 3 years and learned every sound a monster makes before it moves. Dawn came slow and mean. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, the heat was already building, pressing down on Black Hollow Valley like a hand that never lifts. The light turned the dirt yard gold and threw long shadows from the corral posts across the ground where chickens scratched at nothing and found nothing and scratched again. Silas heard Letta moving inside the cabin just before first light. Not footsteps. More like the sound of someone pressing their back against a wall and sliding down to sit. A board creaked. Then silence. She was awake. She had probably been awake all night, same as him. He folded the skinning knife and stood up from the hay bale. His back screamed from 6 hours of sitting rigid against a barn post. 40 years old, and his body moved like 60 when the cold got into it, or the damp, or a night spent not sleeping while watching a dark road for men who hadn't come yet. He walked to the barn door and looked east. Nothing. Empty road, no dust cloud, no rider. Virgil hadn't come. Not yet. Silas crossed the yard to the cabin. He stopped 4 feet from the open door and knocked on the frame. Didn't step in, didn't lean forward. "Letta, I'm going to start a fire out here for coffee. There's hardtack and dried beef in the tin on the shelf if you're hungry." "I ain't coming inside." Silence. Then very quietly, "Why do you knock on your own door?" "Because it ain't my room right now. It's yours." A pause long enough to count 3 heartbeats. "There's blood on the blanket." "From my wrist." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry for bleeding, Letta. That ain't something a person apologizes for." He heard her stand, heard her footsteps cross the floor, slow and careful, each one placed with the deliberate precision of a woman who had learned to move through rooms without making sound. She appeared in the doorway but didn't step out. She looked past him down the east road. "He didn't come," she said. "No, he will. I know. You got a plan for that." Working on it, she almost laughed. It wasn't a real laugh, more like the muscle memory of one. A reflex from a time when laughing didn't carry risk. "You got no rifle, no money, and a skinning knife. That ain't a plan, Silas. That's a eulogy." He built a fire in the pit outside and boiled water for coffee. She sat on the porch step and watched. Neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence had texture to it. Wait. The silence of 2 people who had each spent years alone with their damage and understood instinctively that the space between words was not emptiness. It was consideration. It was respect for the fact that some truths need room to breathe before they're spoken. He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the step beside her. Not too close. She picked it up with her good hand. Drank. Her eyes moved constantly. Scanning the yard, the road, the tree line, the ridge. Not nervous, strategic. The way a field commander surveys terrain before deciding where to make a stand. "Silas," she said. "Yeah. I need to tell you something, and you're going to be angry." He waited. Yesterday at Pruitt's yard, the man in the dirty hat, the one who rode east, he felt the skin on the back of his neck tighten. "I saw him go." Letta said. I saw his face. I know him. His name is Emmett Slade. He runs with Virgil. There's two more his brothers, Rufus and Otis. They do what Virgil tells them because Virgil supplies their opium. They aren't smart, but they're mean, and mean don't need to be smart. Silas set down his coffee. Slowly. You saw Emmett Slade ride east toward Virgil Crane's claim yesterday, and you didn't tell me. No. Why? Her jaw tightened. Her gray eyes met his without blinking. Without apology. Because I needed to know what you are when you're not ready. Every man I've ever known was decent when he chose to be. The question isn't what a man does when he's prepared. It's what he does when the ground shifts and he didn't see it coming. 3 years with Virgil taught me that. He was gentle for the first 2 weeks. Kind even. Brought me food, spoke soft, kept his hands to himself. She paused. Then the door locked. Then the windows got boarded. Then the first finger broke. And I understood that the kindness was never kindness. It was patience. He was patient the way a trap is patient. It sits open and waits for you to step inside, and then it closes, and it was never anything else. She looked at him. I had to know if you were a trap, Silas. I had to see what you did when the thing you didn't plan for walked through your door. So I watched. I waited. And I saw you sit on a hay bale all night with a skinning knife, not because you were guarding your property, but because you were guarding a stranger who threatened to burn your house down. Silas felt the anger drain out of him the way water drains from a cracked bucket. Slowly at first, then all at once, until what was left wasn't anger, but something heavier. Understanding, the realization that this girl had survived not through luck or submission, but through a systematic, relentless intelligence that studied everything around her the way a prisoner studies the walls. And you passed, she said. In case you were wondering, good to know, don't get comfortable. I'll keep testing. Something shifted between them. Not warmth, not yet. Something more structural than warmth, like two load-bearing walls discovering they were holding up the same roof. Now, she said, and her voice changed, harder, the voice of someone who has finished explaining herself and is ready to work. Let me tell you about Virgil Crane. She stood and walked to the edge of the porch. She pointed east with her crooked fingers. His claim is 9 miles that direction. Cabin barn root cellar well. He keeps 2 horses and a mule. He's got a Remington shotgun and a pistol he can't shoot straight because the opium shakes his hands. But he doesn't need to shoot straight. He's got the Slades for that. She counted on her damaged fingers bending the ones that would bend and leaving the broken ones still. Emmett is the oldest. He's the mouth. He walks up front and talks loud and makes you look at him while the other 2 circle around. It's the same every time. I watched him do it to 3 different men who owed Virgil money. Emmett talks. Rufus and Otis flank. One goes for the back door, one comes from the side. And Virgil stays behind it all. Watching, waiting, letting other men bleed for him. He never goes first. Never. She turned to Silas. Emmett is the weakest link. He talks big, but he's never been hit hard. One real threat and he breaks. Without Emmett holding the front, Rufus and Otis don't know what to do. They'll hesitate. And if they hesitate, Virgil won't come in. Silas was staring at her. You've been planning this. I've been planning this for 3 years. I just didn't have anywhere to stand while I did it. He looked at this girl. 19 years old, chained in an auction yard 30 hours ago, and she was laying out a tactical defense like a field commander briefing his officers. Every piece on the board, every move accounted for. She was smarter than him. He knew that with the certainty of a man who recognizes a superior mind and has the sense not to argue with it. What would you do, he said, if you were me? Letta looked surprised, just a flicker. There and gone. You're asking me. You know Virgil. You know the Slades. You know how they move. I don't, so yeah, I'm asking. Nobody ever asked me that before, she said quietly. What I thought, what I'd do. I'm asking now. She sat back down. Her wounded hand rested on her knee. The crooked fingers caught the morning light. First, we need a weapon, a real one. That knife won't stop 4 men. I know. Second, we need this property mapped. Every trail, every hiding spot, every place a person can see without being seen. If they come and you can't stop them, I need to know this land better than they do. Silas nodded. And third, she said, and her voice went even quieter. We need to know when the law's coming. Because Virgil won't just ride in shooting. He's smarter than that. He'll go to the sheriff first. He'll wave that bill of sale in someone's face and make this legal before he makes it violent. She knows Silas thought. She knows every angle of this. She's been surviving this man for 3 years, not by being strong, but by being observant, by watching every pattern, by memorizing every bar of the cage. And now she was out of the cage, and the patterns hadn't changed. But she had. They worked through the morning. Silas showed her the property, every trail, every shortcut, every fold in the land where a person could disappear. The creek crossing where the water ran shallow enough to wade. The ridge trail that looped behind the cabin and came out near the east road. The rock outcrop on the north side where a person could see 2 miles in every direction. The root cellar behind the barn, cool and dark and visible from the road. Letta memorized everything. She didn't ask him to repeat anything. She asked questions, smart ones. Where does the creek go south? Who owns the land on the other side of the ridge? What's the fastest way to the sheriff's office if she needed to get there alone? You think like a soldier, Silas said. I think like a prisoner. Soldiers plan attacks. Prisoners plan escapes. Different skill. Late morning, the heat pressed down so hard even the chickens stopped moving. They sat in the shade of the barn and drank water from the canteen. Letta poured some over her bandaged wrist. The cloth was already showing pink. Silas pointed at it. That needs changing. It's going to fester in this heat. I'll do it, I know you will. But you're going to need both hands for what we're doing this afternoon. He brought clean cloth from the barn, set it on the fence rail and stepped back. She picked it up, wound it around her wrist tight and quick. She'd done this before. She knew how to dress a wound by feel in the dark without making noise. That knowledge sat heavy in Silas Harrow's chest. They heard the horse around midday. Not from the east, from the south. The town road. Silas grabbed the skinning knife and moved to the front of the cabin. Letta appeared in the doorway behind him, already tense, ready reading the road with those gray eyes that never stopped calculating. A single rider came over the rise. Not Virgil. Too small, wrong posture. As the rider got closer, Silas recognized the horse first. A painted mare with a white blaze. Belonged to Edith Calloway, the preacher's widow who ran the dry goods store in town. Edith herself was in the saddle, riding side saddle in a gray dress with a shotgun across her lap. She pulled up 20 feet from the porch and didn't dismount. She looked at Silas, then at Letta in the doorway. She studied her for a long moment. The torn dress, the bandaged wrist, the bare feet, the bruise on her neck that was turning from purple to yellow at the edges. Silas Harrow. Edith. Word in town is, you bought a girl from Pruitt's yard yesterday. I didn't buy her. I got her out. That ain't the story going around. Edith's voice was steady, but her eyes were moving fast, taking inventory of Letta, the way a woman takes inventory of another woman's damage. Not with curiosity, with recognition. Emmett Slade's been in the saloon since last night, telling everybody you paid $30 for a crane girl and took her home. Half the town thinks you bought yourself a wife. Other half thinks worse. I don't care what the town thinks. You should. Because Virgil Crane was in the sheriff's office this morning, filed a complaint, says you stole his indentured ward, says he's got a bill of sale. She shifted the shotgun on her lap. Sheriff Haskell is coming out here this afternoon to talk to you. Letta stepped forward onto the porch. What did the sheriff say exactly? Edith looked at her. Really looked. The way a woman looks at a girl who reminds her of something she has spent decades trying to forget. He said he'd look into it, which means he'll ride out here, look at whatever paper Virgil waves, and do whatever's easiest. Haskell's not a bad man, but he's not a brave one either. That's what I told Silas, Letta said. Smart girl. Edith reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a wrap bundle. She tossed it onto the porch. Salt pork cornmeal, a jar of honey, and a pair of brown leather boots, worn soft but solid. The boots were my daughter's. She's about your size. She moved to Missouri 3 years ago and left half her things behind. Letta looked at the bundle, then at Edith. Why? Because I was married to a man who thought he owned me for 22 years. He didn't chain me to a fence post. But there's more than one kind of chain, and some of them don't leave marks you can show a sheriff. She gathered her reins. And because Doyle Pruitt is a son of a bitch, and somebody in this territory ought to say so out loud, She turned the painted mare south, then stopped. Harrow, fix your fence, get yourself a rifle, and for God's sake, get that girl a proper dress before the sheriff comes. You want the law on your side, you can't have her looking like she just crawled out of a grave. She rode south into the heat shimmer and was gone. Letta picked up the bundle, unwrapped it on the porch, the salt pork, the cornmeal, the honey, and the boots. She held one up, turned it over, ran her thumb along the sole the way a person touches something they've been denied so long they've forgotten what it feels like. She pulled them on, stood up, took 3 steps on the porch boards. They fit, she said, and her voice did something it hadn't done before. It cracked, just slightly, just for a second, not from pain, from something else. Something she hadn't expected to feel and didn't know what to do with. She turned away fast so he wouldn't see her face. Letta, I'm fine. I know you're fine. I was going to say Edith's right about the sheriff. We need to be ready. Letta turned back. Her eyes were dry. Whatever had cracked in her voice was locked away again, stored somewhere safe where it couldn't be used against her. They came in the early afternoon, Sheriff Haskell and another man. Haskell was thick in the middle and slow on a dun horse with a badge that caught the sun every time he shifted. Behind him rode a second man, older, thin, wearing a black vest and a flat-brimmed hat. Sharp blue eyes set in a face that looked like it had been assembled for the specific purpose of finding fault with things. Haskell pulled up 20 feet from the porch. Harrow, Sheriff, you know why I'm here. I can guess. Haskell shifted in his saddle. He did not look comfortable. He looked like a man who had been given a task he did not want and was hoping someone would give him a reason to hand it back. Virgil Crane came to my office this morning. Says you took his indentured ward from Pruitt's trading post without his consent. Says he's got a bill of sale signed and legal. Says he wants her returned. She ain't his to return. He's got a paper says different. A paper he forced a 16-year-old girl to sign while he held her hand to the pen. That ain't a contract, Haskell. That's assault. The sheriff rubbed his jaw, the gesture of a man who knows the difference between right and easy and is trying to find a place where the two overlap so he doesn't have to choose. That's a serious accusation, Harrow. Look at her wrist, Sheriff. Look at her hand. Count the burn scars on her arm. Then tell me my accusation is serious. Letta didn't wait to be examined. She stepped off the porch and walked toward the 2 men. She held up her left hand. The 2 crooked fingers healed at angles that were wrong enough to make Haskell wince from 20 feet. Then she pushed up her sleeve and extended her right arm. 7 cigar burns, neat, deliberate, running from wrist to elbow like a tally of patience and cruelty. The second rider dismounted. He walked toward Letta and stopped 6 feet away. Miss, may I see your arm? Letta looked at Silas. He gave a small nod. She extended her arm. The man examined the burns without touching her. He looked at the crooked fingers. He looked at the bandaged wrist, the raw skin still weeping through the cloth. How old are you, 19? How old when this began? 16. After my stepdaddy died. Who did this to you, Virgil Crane? The man straightened up. He was older than he'd looked from a distance. 60 maybe. With the particular authority of someone who had spent decades reading documents and finding the lies inside them. This is Judge's clerk Aldrich Morrow, Haskell said. Out of Cheyenne. He was in town on other business. I asked him to ride along. Morrow turned to Haskell. His voice was precise and carried the weight of a man who said things once because once was sufficient. Sheriff, in my professional opinion, whatever document Mr. Crane possesses is almost certainly signed under duress. A minor coerced into indenture by a guardian is not a legal contract in Wyoming territory. It's not a legal contract anywhere in these United States. Haskell shifted again. Morrow, I hear you, but Virgil's got people in town who back his claim. The Slade brothers, a few others. If I just dismiss his complaint, there's going to be trouble. Letta spoke. Every man turned to look at her. There's already trouble, Sheriff. There's been trouble for 3 years. The trouble isn't new. You're just seeing it for the first time because I'm standing in daylight instead of locked in a house with boarded windows. The trouble is Virgil Crane walking free in your town while I've got 7 burns on my arm and 2 fingers that don't close. That's the trouble, Sheriff. Not me, not Silas Harrow. Virgil Crane. The silence that followed had edges. It pressed against the men standing in the yard the way heat presses against skin. Inescapable. Morrow spoke first. Sheriff, I'll draft a temporary order of protection. Miss Crane stays here under Mr. Harrow's guardianship until a proper hearing can be arranged. Virgil Crane is not to come within 1 mile of this property. And if he does, Silas said, then the sheriff arrests him. Haskell put his hat back on, looked at Letta one more time. Miss, for what it's worth. I'm sorry, I should have looked harder. Letta didn't answer. She didn't owe him absolution, and she didn't offer it. Absolution was something people asked for when they wanted to feel better about what they hadn't done, and Letta wasn't in the business of making other people feel better. She had spent 3 years making Virgil Crane feel comfortable and powerful and unchallenged, and she was finished with that particular kind of labor. The two men rode south. Letta watched them until they were gone over the rise. Then she sat down on the porch step and put her face in her hands. She pressed her palms hard against her eyes and breathed. Deep, controlled, deliberate. The breathing of a person who feels something enormous shifting inside their chest and needs to hold still until it settles into a shape they can carry. Silas sat down on the step beside her. Not close, close enough. You did good. I showed strangers my scars. You showed a clerk of the court evidence of a crime. That's different, Ed. It didn't feel different. It felt like standing naked in front of two men I don't know and asking them to believe me. They believed you. This time, she dropped her hands. Her eyes were dry and hard. A piece of paper from a clerk isn't going to stop Virgil, she said. You know that, I know it. That order doesn't matter. The sheriff doesn't matter. Virgil doesn't care about law. He cares about owning things. And when you take something from a man like that, he doesn't file complaints. He comes in the night. Then we'll be ready. With what, Silas, a skinning knife and a hatchet and whatever else we can get. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something he didn't expect. There's a rifle in Edith Calloway's store. I saw it through the window when we passed through yesterday. Winchester. Lever action. Hanging on the wall behind the counter. I got no money, Letta, I know. But Edith gave us boots and food and rode out here with a shotgun on her lap. She's on our side. I can't ask her for a rifle. You aren't asking, I am. Silas started to object. Letta cut him off. Her voice was quiet, but it had iron in it. The kind of iron you can't see until you hit it. Silas, you gave up everything for me. Your rifle, your money, your safety. You sleep in a barn so I can have a room with an unlocked door. You showed me every trail on this property so I'd have a way out if things went bad. You've done every single thing right, she paused. Now let me do something. Let me ride into town and talk to Edith. Let me get us a weapon. Let me be useful. You're already useful. I'm already surviving. That isn't the same as useful. I'm tired of surviving, Silas. I want to fight. He looked at her for a long time. This girl who had been chained in an auction yard 2 days ago was asking to ride alone into a town where half the people thought she was property and the other half thought worse. She was asking to walk into a store and negotiate for a rifle with nothing to trade but her word and whatever Edith Calloway saw when she looked at her. Take the mare, he said. She's slow, but she's steady. Stay on the main road. Don't stop for anyone. I know if you see Virgil, you ride. Don't look back. Don't try to be brave. You ride. I won't stop for him either. Letta, I'll be back before dark. She saddled the mare herself. Silas watched from the corral fence. Sure hands, quick motions. She checked the cinch twice and adjusted the stirrups without asking for help. She'd saddled horses in the dark. She'd done it 1,000 times under a roof with boarded windows, while the man who claimed to own her slept in the next room. She was in the saddle and turning south when Silas said her name. She looked back. If you don't come back, he said, I'll understand. You ride any direction you want. I meant what I said. You're free. Letta held his gaze. The morning sun was behind her and her face was in shadow, but her eyes caught light the way creek water catches light moving and steady at the same time. I know you meant it, she said. That's why I'm coming back. She rode south. Silas stood in the yard and watched her until she was a shape against the heat shimmer. Then a dot. Then nothing. He was alone. The ranch was quiet. The chickens scratched. The creek whispered its low, constant complaint. He picked up the hatchet Letta had been using during the morning's work and set it on the porch rail. Then he went to the fence and started working. Not because the fence mattered right now, Because a man who stops moving, starts thinking and thinking was a dangerous occupation when the woman you barely knew was riding alone toward a town full of people who considered her something that could be written on a piece of paper and called sold. 2 hours passed, then three. The sun hit its peak and started falling west. Silas drove the last fence post into the ground and stood there with sweat running off his jaw, staring south. Nothing. He went to the creek, filled the canteen, drank half, poured the rest over his head. He swept the cabin floor. He checked the chickens. He did every pointless task he could find to keep from walking down that south road. 4 hours. She should have been back. Town was 7 miles. An hour each way on a slow horse. An hour with Edith. That was 3 hours, maybe 3.5. She'd been gone 4. Silas picked up the skinning knife and started walking south. He made it a quarter mile before he heard hoofbeats. One horse coming fast. South Road. He stopped, gripped the knife, waited. Letta came over the rise at a canter. The mare was breathing hard but moving strong. Letta's face was flushed, and there was something across her lap that caught the sunlight and threw it back in a hard silver line. She pulled up beside him and swung down. She was holding a Winchester lever-action rifle. Not new, the stock was scratched, and the barrel had a dull patina from years of handling. But it was oiled and clean, and when she worked the action, it cycled smooth and hard, with the mechanical precision of a thing that was built to do one job and did it well. Edith, Silas said. Edith, it was her husband's, the preacher. She said he never deserved it, and neither does Virgil Crane. She held the rifle out to him. He took it, felt the weight settle into his hands. The balance was different from Jesse's gun, but the mechanism was the same. His fingers found the lever and the trigger guard and the stock, and his body remembered what to do with all of it. 14 years of muscle memory coming back like water filling a dry creek bed. What did it cost? She didn't want money. She wanted a promise. What promise that if Virgil Crane sets foot on this property, he doesn't leave with me? Silas looked at the rifle, then at Letta, then at the East Road. That's a promise I already made. I know, now it's official. She pulled something else from the saddlebag. A box of cartridges. 40 rounds. She set them on the porch rail beside the hatchet. Then her voice changed. Tighter. Harder. The way it got when she was delivering information that had weight, and she wanted to get it out clean before the weight crushed something. There's something else, she said. Edith told me. What? Virgil was in town today, at the saloon. Emmett Slade told him about the sheriff's visit, about Morrow's order. Silas waited. He tore it up, Letta said, right there in the saloon, tore the order in half and dropped it on the floor. Edith heard him through the wall of her shop. She heard every word. What did he say? Letta's jaw set. Her gray eyes went flat and hard the way they did when she was looking at something she had seen before and knew the shape of. He said, no piece of paper takes what's mine. He said he's coming to the ranch and he's bringing her back. And if he has to burn it to the ground to do it, then he'll burn it to the ground. She looked at him. He's not coming to talk, Silas. He's coming to take. And if he can't take, he's coming to destroy. Then we don't give him either option. There's 4 of them and 2 of us. 2 of us with a rifle, a hatchet, a skinning knife, and knowledge of every trail on this property. He sat down on the step beside her. And one of us, he said, is the smartest person I've ever met who spent 3 years memorizing every move Virgil Crane makes. That's not a compliment. That's survival. In my experience, those are the same thing. She almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles moved, but the expression didn't fully form, like a flower that starts to open and then stops because the air isn't warm enough yet. All right, she said. Here's what I know. She leaned forward. Her wounded hand rested on her knee. Her good hand drew invisible lines in the air between them, mapping approaches, marking positions, placing each piece on the board. Virgil won't come up the main road. He's not stupid. He'll expect you to watch the south and east. He'll come through the dry creek bed from the east. The Slades will spread out. Emmett walks up front, talks loud, tries to pull your attention to him. Rufus circles to the barn. Otis goes for the back of the cabin. They pinch inward while Emmett holds you facing forward. She looked at him. Virgil stays behind all of it. He waits. He watches. He lets other men do the bleeding. And when it's over, he walks in like he won a war he never fought. So we break the pattern. We break Emmett. He's the hinge. Take him out of the equation, the others lose their shape. One shot near his head, and he'll run. Without Emmett talking, Rufus and Otis won't know what to do with their hands. They'll freeze for a few seconds, and Virgil won't come in without cover. Silas loaded the Winchester, 14 rounds in the tube magazine. He worked the lever, chambering the first round. The sound was clean and hard and final. It was the most comforting thing he'd heard in 2 days. "I'll take the ridge," he said. "North side. From there, I can see the east approach the creek bed in the front of the barn. You stay in the cabin with the hatchet, door closed. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you swing." "No, Letta, no, I'm not hiding inside waiting to find out if you're alive. I'm done waiting. I'm done sitting behind closed doors listening to sounds and trying to guess which ones mean danger and which ones mean it's over." She stood up. "Put me on the porch. I can see the front yard and the south road from there. You take the ridge. When Emmett comes up to talk, I'll keep him focused on me. You watch for the brothers." Silas stared at her. "You want to be the bait. I want to be the thing Virgil sees when he realizes his plan isn't working. I want him to look at this porch and see me standing upright in boots Edith Calloway gave me on the land of a man who didn't buy me. And I want him to understand that the girl he chained to a fence post is done being property." Silas felt the words land somewhere in his chest. Not the part where fear lives. The part where conviction lives. The part that recognizes courage not as the absence of fear, but as the decision to stand in a specific place and refuse to leave it. "All right," he said. "Porch, hatchet in reach. You see anything move east, you call out one word, east. That's all I need. East. And if they get past me, Letta, you run. North Trail, rock outcrop. You know the way? I know the way. But I'm not running, not from him, not ever again." He didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. She had made her decision the way she had made every decision since he unlocked that chain. With her eyes open and her back straight and the full weight of what it meant sitting on her shoulders where she could feel it. They ate the last of the salt pork and cornmeal. Letta cooked it over the fire pit. Fast, efficient, no waste. She divided it evenly. Silas tried to give her more. She pushed it back. "Equal," she said. "If we're doing this, we're doing it equal." "Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I'm 19. "Yes, Letta." They drank coffee on the porch as the sun went down. The sky turned orange, then red, then purple, then the deep bruised blue that comes just before full dark. The east road lost its edges and became a line of shadow between darker shapes. An owl called from somewhere near the creek. Letta picked up the hatchet. She held it across her knees the way she'd been holding it when this story started. The way she'd be holding it when Virgil Crane's voice came out of the dark and said the words he believed with every rotten fiber of his being. "Come home, girl. You belong to me." But that was still hours away. For now, the road was dark and the night was quiet, and two people sat on a porch 10 feet apart with borrowed weapons, and the stubborn, unreasonable belief that a human being was not something you could write on a piece of paper and call sold. Silas Harrow in his faded blue shirt beneath the cracked leather vest loaded a round into the chamber of a dead preacher's rifle and looked at the dark the way a man looks at a door that's about to open. Letta sat with her back against the wall, and her eyes on the east and the hatchet across her knees and the boots on her feet that a stranger had given her because one woman recognized another woman's chains even when those chains had no iron in them. She was not afraid. She had been afraid for 3 years, and the fear had burned through her the way a fever burns through a body, and when it broke, what was left was not weakness. What was left was a kind of clarity that has no name in English, but every woman who has survived a man like Virgil Crane knows the shape of it. It is the moment you stop asking permission to exist. She whispered to the dark, "Let him come." The first sound was the creek, not the water. The water had been running all night low and steady, the constant murmur of a thing that does not care what happens on its banks. This was something crossing it, heavy, careful. The soft thud of hooves on wet rock, then the drag of a boot through shallow current, then another, then a third set of steps, lighter, faster, angling north. Letta's voice came from the porch, low and controlled. One word, east. Silas pressed his belly flat against the ridge and strained his eyes toward the creek bed. The dark was thick, but not total. Starlight gave the land a faint silver wash enough to see shapes if they moved. and something was moving. Down by the creek, maybe 200 yards out, a shadow separated from the tree line and stopped. Then a second shadow farther south, then a third north of the first two, drifting toward the barn with the careful lateral movement of a man who knows where he's going and has done this before. Three shadows, three Slades. Virgil was out there somewhere behind them, watching, waiting, letting other men walk into the open first because that is what Virgil Crane had always done. He built his cruelty on the backs of other men's willingness to bleed for him, and he stood behind them the way a coward stands behind a wall and calls it strategy. Silas sighted the Winchester toward the first shadow, the one walking upright, not trying to hide, walking toward the cabin with the loose, easy stride of a man who thinks he's in charge of what happens next. That would be Emmett, the talker, the front man. The second and third shadows split wider, one circling south toward the corral, one drifting north toward the barn. Rufus and Otis, flanking, exactly the way Letta said they would. Every piece moving to its predicted square on the board she'd mapped out on the porch 6 hours ago. Silas let himself breathe, slow, controlled. The way breathing goes when the world narrows to a trigger and a target and the air between them. He had not felt this particular stillness in 24 years, not since Antietam, not since the cornfield, but the body remembers. The body always remembers. Emmett Slade's voice cut through the dark, loud, almost cheerful. The voice of a man performing confidence because actual confidence is something he has never earned. "Harrow, hey Harrow, you awake in there?" Letta didn't move. She sat on the porch with the hatchet across her knees and watched Emmett walk closer. 50 yards, 40, 30. "Harrow, come on out. Virgil just wants to talk. That's all. Just a conversation between reasonable men." Letta's voice carried clear across the yard, steady, almost conversational. The voice of a woman who has decided that fear is a luxury she can no longer afford. "Silas ain't in the cabin, Emmett, but I am." Emmett stopped. He hadn't expected her. His silhouette shifted, head turning toward the porch. She could see his shape now. Tall, thin, hat cocked to one side. Something in his right hand catching starlight. A pistol. "Well, well, look who's got a voice now." Emmett laughed. "Letta May almost didn't recognize you without the chain. Almost didn't recognize you without Virgil telling you what to say." The laugh died like a match in wind. "Watch your mouth, girl, or what, you'll chain me to another fence post. That trick only works once, Emmett. And you weren't even the one holding the lock. You just watched. That's all you've ever done. Watch and talk and let other men do the parts that take spine." Emmett took another step forward. 20 yards from the porch now, close enough that Letta could hear his breathing. It was faster than his voice suggested. The voice said confidence. The breathing said otherwise. "Where's Harrow around? That ain't an answer. It's the only one you're getting." From the ridge, Silas tracked the flanking shadows. The one heading for the barn that would be Otis had stopped behind the water trough. The other, Rufus, was moving slow along the south side of the corral, working his way toward the back of the cabin with the patient, deliberate movement of a man who enjoys what comes after the sneaking. Rufus was the dangerous one. Letta had said that on the porch. Emmett talks. Otis folds. But Rufus has something wrong in his head. He hurts people because he likes it. He doesn't need a reason. The hurting is the reason. Silas shifted the rifle toward Rufus. Let him get a little closer. Let the pattern develop. Emmett raised his voice again. "Harrow, I know you're out there. Virgil's got a legal claim on this girl. Bill of sale signed and witnessed. You hand her over peaceful and nobody gets hurt. That's a fair deal, Harrow." "Sheriff Haskell issued an order of protection," Letta said. "Not a court order for Virgil." "You're lying, Emmett. And you're bad at it. You've always been bad at it. Virgil just never told you because he needed someone stupid enough to walk up front." "Shut up, Letta." Emmett raised the pistol, not pointing it at her, holding it up so she could see it in the starlight. The universal language of men who have never earned their authority and know no way to claim it except by showing the tools of violence to someone smaller. "Last chance, Harrow. Come out or we come in." Silas put a round into the dirt 2 feet in front of Emmett's boots. The crack of the Winchester split the night open. The muzzle flash lit the ridge for half a second, long enough for every man below to see exactly where Silas was and exactly what he was holding. The sound rolled across the valley and came back from the far ridge like an echo arguing with itself. Emmett jumped backwards so hard he tripped over his own feet and went down on his back in the dirt. The pistol flew from his hand and skidded under the corral fence. He lay there with his arms over his face, breathing in short, ragged gasps. "That's your only warning shot, Emmett." Silas's voice from the ridge was calm, measured. The voice of a man who has fired at human beings before and understands that the warning is the kindest part of what comes next. The next one finds you. Otis broke. He came up from behind the water trough and ran, not toward the cabin, away, straight east back toward the creek, his boots splashing through the shallows. Gone in 5 seconds, swallowed by the dark and the sound of water. One down. Rufus didn't run. Rufus was already at the south wall of the cabin, pressed flat against the boards, moving toward the back door with a knife in each hand. He moved the way a man moves when he's done this before, and the doing is something he looks forward to. Letta heard him, not his footsteps, his breathing, the specific breathing of a man who is excited by what he is about to do. She had heard that breathing before. In the house with the boarded windows. In the dark. In the room at the end of the hall where Virgil Crane had taught her every sound a predator makes before it strikes. Southside, she called, one word of direction, the way a spotter calls wind for a marksman. Silas swung the rifle south, but the angle was wrong. The cabin blocked his line of fire. Rufus was in the blind spot, the one place the ridge couldn't cover. Silas was up and running before the thought finished forming. Down the ridge slope, boots sliding on loose rock, rifle in both hands. 40 yards to the cabin. He could cover it in 15 seconds if he didn't fall. Behind him in the yard, Emmett was scrambling in the dirt on his hands and knees, feeling for the lost pistol like a man searching for his courage and finding only fence rails and chicken droppings. At the cabin, Letta heard the back door slam open. She spun. The hatchet was already in her hand. It had been in her hand for 6 hours, and it would stay in her hand because she had spent 3 years imagining what she would do if she ever held a weapon and faced the men who had held her down, and she wasn't going to waste the moment by hesitating. Rufus Slade stood in the back doorway, shorter than Emmett, wider, built low to the ground with arms that were too long for his body and a face that looked like something carved from stone and abandoned before the carver bothered giving it any expression that resembled human feeling. He had a knife in each hand. The blades were not clean. "Hey there, Letta," Virgil says hello. Letta swung the hatchet. She swung it the way a person swings when 3 years of rage and terror and helplessness converge into a single point at the end of a blade. Fast, hard, all the way from the shoulder with every pound of her thin frame behind it. Rufus jumped back. Not fast enough. The blade caught his left forearm and opened a gash from wrist to elbow, deep enough to show the white beneath the red. Blood sprayed the door frame in a dark arc. He howled, a sharp animal sound, surprise more than pain. The surprise of a man who has spent years being the one who makes other people bleed and has forgotten that the equation can reverse. He dropped one knife. Blood ran between his fingers and pooled on the floorboards. "You little—" He lunged with the remaining knife. Letta sidestepped, not graceful, desperate. Her hip caught the edge of the table and she stumbled, but kept her feet because keeping her feet was the only thing between her and the floor was where Virgil Crane's world existed. The floor was where you ended up when you stopped fighting. She was never going back to the floor. She brought the hatchet up between them. Blade out, point forward. "Come on, Rufus, come on." Her voice was shaking now, but her hands were not. Her hands were steady the way a surgeon's hands are steady. The way hands get when the body understands that what they hold is the only thing preventing what comes next. Rufus looked at his bleeding arm, then at the hatchet, then at Letta's eyes. Whatever he saw in them made him hesitate for 1 second. Just one. The particular hesitation of a man who has always been the predator, recognizing for the first time that the thing in front of him has teeth. Silas came through the front door at a dead run. He hit Rufus with the rifle stock. A straight driving blow to the side of the head that sent the man sideways into the wall with a sound like a feed sack hitting barn boards. Rufus's remaining knife clattered to the floor. He slid down the wall conscious but not coherent, blood from his arm pooling beneath him in a dark spreading shape. Silas stood over him, the rifle leveled at his chest, breathing hard but hands steady. "Stay down." Rufus looked up with cloudy eyes. The eyes of a man trying to reassemble a world that just rearranged itself without his permission. Virgil's going to kill you, Aro. Virgil ain't here, is he? Virgil sent you. That's what Virgil does. He sends other men to bleed. From outside Emmett's voice, high, panicked, the voice of a man whose script has been torn up and who has no talent for improvisation. Virgil, it's gone wrong. Harrow's got a rifle. Otis ran. Rufus is down. Virgil, we need to... Silas grabbed Rufus by the collar and dragged him through the cabin and out the front door onto the porch. The man's bleeding arm left a dark smear across the floorboards like a signature written in the wrong ink. He sat Rufus against the porch rail and turned to the yard. Emmett was standing 30 feet away with his hands raised. No pistol. He'd given up looking for it. His face was gray in the starlight and his legs were shaking. On the ground, Emmett, face down, hands behind your head. Emmett dropped like his strings were cut, face in the dirt, hands behind his neck, making small wet sounds that might have been crying or might have been the noise a man makes when the distance between who he pretends to be and who he actually is becomes too large to bridge. Letta, Silas called. You all right? She was standing in the cabin doorway. The hatchet was still in her hand, held out in front of her. Her whole body was vibrating. Not fear, not anymore. Adrenaline, Charlem. The trembling that comes after you swing a blade at a man's arm and connect, and the blade does what blades do, and the blood goes where blood goes, and you're still standing, and he's not. I'm all right, she said. Where's Virgil? Good question. Silas scanned the dark. Otis had won east. Emmett was in the dirt. Rufus was bleeding on the porch, but Virgil Crane was nowhere. Then a match flared by the barn, a small orange light 60 yards away blooming in the darkness like a poisonous flower opening its petals. Then another match. Then the smell. Kerosene. Thick. Chemical. Unmistakable. The smell of something about to be destroyed by a man who would rather burn what he can't own than let it exist without him. Virgil Crane was at the barn, and he was lighting it on fire. The hay inside caught fast. The orange glow went from match flame to bonfire in seconds. The barn lit up from the inside like a lantern made of old wood and dry grass, and the heat reached across the yard in a wave that Letta felt on her face from the porch. The mare screamed inside, a high, terrible sound that cut through everything else the way a child's cry cuts through a crowded room. The sound of an animal that does not understand what is happening and only knows that it is trapped and the world is turning orange. Silas ran, 40 yards to the barn. The heat hit him at 20. At 10, the smoke was thick enough to taste thick enough to feel in his lungs like a fist closing. He hit the barn door with his shoulder, and it blew open, and inside was a cathedral of fire. Orange and black and roaring. The mare was tied to her stall, rearing eyes, white hooves cracking against the boards in a rhythm that sounded like a heart trying to beat its way out of a chest. He cut the rope with his skinning knife. One stroke. The blade was sharp because he kept it sharp, because a man who has nothing keeps what he has in working order. The mare bolted past him and out the door, trailing smoke from her mane. Silas stumbled after her, coughing, eyes burning, the heat on his back like a hand pressing him forward, pushing him out of the fire the way the world sometimes pushes a man toward the thing he's supposed to do next, whether he's ready or not. Behind the barn, in the space between the fire and the dark, a shape moved, stepped out of the shadows, stepped into the light with the calm, unhurried pace of a man who has been waiting behind other men his entire life and finally decided to walk forward. Virgil Crane was smaller than Silas expected, narrow-shouldered, thin-faced, hollow cheeks and glassy eyes. The face of a man who had been smoking opium long enough that the drug had eaten the architecture of his features and left something approximate in its place. Something that looked human from a distance, but up close was missing pieces. He wore a long coat despite the July heat, and he held a shotgun at hip level. Harrow, Silas raised the Winchester. They stood 15 feet apart with a burning barn at their backs and the sound of the mare screaming somewhere in the dark. Put it down, Virgil. You got my property, Harrow. You got my girl. I've come to collect. She ain't your property. She ain't your girl. She ain't your anything. Virgil smiled. It was the worst smile Silas had ever seen. And Silas had seen men smile in cornfields while stepping over bodies. He'd seen men smile while the world burned around them. But this smile was different. This smile had no connection to any feeling a human being would recognize. It was mechanical, a learned behavior, the imitation of an expression performed by something that had studied human faces but never understood what they meant. I got a bill of sale says different. A paper you forced a child to sign. She signed it. Don't matter how. It matters to the judge's clerk who was here yesterday. It matters under Wyoming territorial law. And it matters to every person in that town who heard you tear up a court order and threaten to burn a man's ranch. Something flickered in Virgil's eyes, not fear, irritation, the look of a man who is accustomed to the game going his way and experiences genuine confusion when it doesn't. Morrow's a fool, Virgil said. Haskell's a coward. By the time any of this gets to a real courtroom, I'll have her back and you'll be in the ground. That's how this works, Harrow. That's how it's always worked. Not tonight. You think you're different? You think because you sleep in a barn and leave the door unlocked. You're some kind of saint, Virgil's voice dropped. You bought her, Harrow, same as me. You walked into Pruitt's yard and you paid cash money for a girl. Don't dress it up. The words hit. Silas felt them land in the place behind his ribs, where the old guilt lived. The place where a man keeps the things that wake him at 3 in the morning. The part of him that had hated himself since the moment he said, "What do you want for her?" in Pruitt's yard, and a price came back, and he paid it. There's a difference, Silas said. No, there ain't. The only difference between you and me is I'm honest about what I am. The difference, said a voice from behind Virgil, is that he unchained me and you put the chains on. Virgil spun. Letta stood 10 feet behind him. She had come around the far side of the burning barn while the two men talked. She had moved through smoke and heat in the glow of a fire that Virgil had set to destroy the only safe place she had known in 3 years, and she had come out the other side of it, standing upright with her gray eyes catching the firelight and turning it into something that looked like molten steel. She was not holding the hatchet. Her hands were at her sides, open, empty. She didn't need a weapon for this part. Hello, Virgil. Virgil swung the shotgun toward her. His hands were steady. A man who burns children with cigars does not flinch at pointing a gun at one. Get over here, girl. Now. We're going home. I am home. You ain't got a home. You got a fool who paid too much for you in a cabin that's next after the barn. No, the word was quiet, simple. 2 letters, 1 syllable. But it carried 3 years of silence behind it. 3 years of yes, sir, and please don't, and I'm sorry, and the taste of her own blood from biting her tongue when the words she actually wanted to say were pounding against her teeth like fists against a lock-and door. No, Virgil's face changed. The mechanical calm cracked, and underneath it was something ancient. Rage. The specific, bottomless rage of a man who has been told no by someone he considers less than human. The rage of ownership denied. The rage of a man whose entire identity is built on the premise that certain people belong to him and the universe just disagreed. You ungrateful little Virgil, Letta said. Look at me. He looked. You burned me 7 times. You broke my fingers. You locked into him. You locked me in a house with no windows and told me the world outside was worse than you. You sold me to a man who chains girls next to mules. You came here tonight with 3 men and kerosene to burn the first place I've slept without fear in 3 years. She took 1 step forward. And I'm still here. I'm standing in front of you in boots a stranger gave me, on the porch of a man who gave up everything he owned and asked for nothing back. And I'm saying no. Not because somebody told me to, because I am choosing to. You don't get to own that word. You don't get to own me. You don't get to own anything that breathes. I'll kill you both, Virgil said. His voice was thin now. The anger had eaten through the performance, and what was underneath was smaller than anyone expected. What was underneath was a hollow man in a long coat holding a shotgun. He could barely keep steady because the opium shakes had found his hands, and his hands had found the limits of what cruelty can sustain when the thing it feeds on stops cooperating. You won't, Letta said, because the sheriff knows you're here. Edith Calloway knows. Half the town knows. And when this is over, every person in Wyoming territory is going to know what you did to a 16-year-old girl in a house with boarded windows. Every burn, every broken bone, every locked door. I'm going to stand in a courtroom and say it out loud, and your name is going to mean what it's always meant except this time everyone will know it. Virgil's finger tightened on the trigger. Silas fired. The Winchester kicked against his shoulder. The round caught Virgil in the right arm, high through the meat of the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The shotgun discharged into the dirt, spraying rock and dust. Virgil fell to his knees, grabbing his shoulder with his good hand, blood running between his fingers. He screamed. Not a word, just a sound, raw and animal and furious. The sound of a man who has never been on this side of the pain and does not know how to hold it. Silas worked the lever, chambered another round, walked forward until he was standing over Virgil Crane in the dirt. That girl is not your property. She never was. No paper, no debt, no blood relation gives a man the right to own another human being. I know because I fought a war over that exact question, and your side lost. Virgil looked up at him, blood soaking his coat, eyes glassy but conscious. You shot me in the arm on purpose. Next one won't be. Letta walked forward. She knelt in front of Virgil, not close enough to reach, but close enough that he had to look at her. Close enough that he could see her face and her eyes and the expression in them that was not hatred and not triumph and not satisfaction. It was completion. The expression of a person who has carried something for a very long time and is setting it down. The bill of sale, she said. Where is it? Go to hell. Where is it, Virgil? He laughed, wet and ugly, blood on his teeth, inside coat pocket. Left side, take it. Won't matter, I'll write another. I'll swear out another and another, and Letta reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Brown, wrinkled, stained with something dark that might have been tobacco, and might have been blood, and might have been the residue of 3 years of a girl's life reduced to ink on a page. She unfolded it in the firelight. Her own name in handwriting that wasn't hers. The details of a transaction that treated a human being as a line item. And at the bottom, a signature. Shaky, uneven. The letters of a terrified 16-year-old girl whose hand was being held to the pen by a man 3 times her size. Letta tore it in half. Then she tore the halves in half. Then she tore the quarters into pieces so small they floated from her fingers like ash from the barn still burning behind her. There's your paper, she said. Virgil stared at the pieces drifting to the dirt around his knees. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time in the years she had known him, Virgil Crane had nothing to say. The machinery of his cruelty required an audience that was afraid, and the girl kneeling in front of him was not afraid. And without fear, the machine had no fuel, and the man behind it was just a bleeding wreck in the dirt with a piece of paper turning to confetti around him. Silas pulled Virgil to his feet by his good arm, tied his hands with rope from the corral, pulled Emmett out of the dirt where he'd been lying face down for the entire confrontation, crying, loaded Rufus, barely conscious, onto one of the slayed horses tied in the creek bed. 3 men, beaten by a broke cowboy with a borrowed rifle and a 19-year-old girl with a hatchet and a word she'd never been allowed to say. They walked to town in the dark. Silas led the mare with the 3 men roped to the saddle. Letta walked beside him. She had not put the hatchet down. She carried it at her side, the handle resting against her hip, and she would carry it for a long time yet because 3 years of empty hands had taught her the value of holding something that could keep the world at a distance she chose. They reached town at first light. Main Street was empty except for a dog sleeping under the general store porch, and Edith Calloway, who was standing in front of her shop with her arms crossed and a look on her face that suggested she had been standing there all night and intended to stand there until the correct outcome arrived. You did it, Edith said. Letta did it, Silas said. We did it, Letta corrected. Sheriff Haskell came out of his office in suspenders and uncombed hair. He looked at Virgil, bleeding, tied silent. He looked at the Slade brothers. He looked at Silas and Letta standing side by side, covered in smoke and dirt and blood that was not theirs. Lord Almighty. 3 for your cell, Sheriff Silas said. Virgil Crane. Arson. Assault. Attempted kidnapping. Rufus Slade breaking and entering with intent to harm. Emmett Slade armed trespass. And when you've got them locked up, send for Judge Morrow in Cheyenne. Letta's got a story to tell. And this time it's going in an official record. Haskell took the 3 men inside. The cell door clanged shut. Through the jailhouse window, Letta could see Virgil sitting on the bench, holding his bleeding arms, staring at the wall. His face was blank, empty. The face of a man who had just discovered that the world he built, the world where he owned things and people, and nobody said no, had walls. And the walls had just come down around him, and he was sitting in the rubble wondering how a girl he considered furniture had dismantled every piece of it with a single syllable. Edith stepped forward and draped her shawl over Letta's shoulders. Letta looked at her. Then she did something Silas had not seen before. She reached out and took the older woman's hand, just for a moment. A squeeze. The kind of contact that says more than a speech because it comes from a person who has learned to flinch away from every hand that reaches for her and is choosing deliberately to reach back. Edith's eyes went bright. She turned away and went into her store. The hearing came on Friday. Judge Aldrich Morrow rode back from Cheyenne on Wednesday and set up in the town hall, a one-room building that served as courtroom and church and dance hall depending on the day. Every seat was taken. People stood along the walls. Edith Calloway sat in the front row with her hands folded and a look on her face that dared anyone in the room to breathe too loudly. Mrs. Harwell sat beside her, the Cooper sisters near the back leaning forward. The men were there too, ranchers, shopkeepers, drifters, some sympathetic, some curious, some present because they had done business with Virgil and wanted to see which direction the wind blew before choosing a side. Haskell brought Virgil in. His arm was in a sling. His face was pale from blood loss and opium withdrawal, and something Leda recognized because she had studied this man the way a cartographer studies terrain. Virgil Crane was scared. She had never seen him scared. He had spent 3 years manufacturing fear in others. Feeling it himself was new, and he wore it badly the way a man wears a coat that doesn't fit, pulling at it, adjusting it, unable to make it sit right on his frame. He looked at Letta. She was sitting in the front row beside Silas. Gray dress, silver comb in her hair, the one from Jesse's box that Silas had given her that morning, his mother's comb, the one Jesse had said he was saving for someone important. Boots on her feet, back straight, hands steady in her lap. Virgil looked away first. Morrow called the hearing to order. He stated the charges: arson, assault, unlawful indenture of a minor, attempted kidnapping. Letta was the primary witness. Miss Crane, Morrow said, "Whenever you're ready." Letta stood. She walked to the front of the room. She turned and faced every person in it. She found Silas's eyes. He was sitting where she'd asked him to sit. Not behind her, beside her, in the front row where she could see him without turning her head. She started talking. She told him about the day her stepdaddy died, and Virgil walked into her room and said she belonged to him now. She told him about the first night, about the locks and the boards on the windows, in the darkness that became her entire world for 3 years. She told him about the fingers, how he bent them backward over the edge of the kitchen table and pushed until they snapped one and then the other while she screamed into a rag he had stuffed in her mouth, because screaming was only allowed when it served his purposes, and her pain was not one of his purposes. She told him about the burns, 7 of them, one for each time she resisted. Administered with the calm precision of a man performing a task he considers routine, the way a man brands cattle, the way a man marks what he owns. She told him about the bridge, standing on the rail at Harlan Bridge, with the water running fast below, and the cold air on her face, and the decision that happened inside her chest that was not about living or dying, but about refusing. Refusing to let him be the last chapter. She told him about the auction yard, chained between mules, flies on her bare feet, men walking past who saw something that was not a person and kept walking because not a person is easier than person in chains. Because person in chains requires you to do something and not a person requires only that you look away. Then she told them about Silas. He didn't rescue me, she said. I need everyone in this room to understand that. He didn't ride in on a white horse. He walked into a trading post to buy a draft horse because his ranch was dying. He saw me chained to a fence. He made a choice. He gave up his brother's rifle, the last thing he had of a boy who died at 17 in a cornfield at Antietam, and he traded it for my freedom. Not for me, for my freedom. There's a difference, and that difference is the whole point. The room was silent, not the polite silence of people waiting for a speaker to finish. The heavy, airless silence of people hearing something they cannot unhear and understanding that what they do with it will define them. I am not property, Leda said. I was never property. No piece of paper makes a person into property. No signature forced from a child's hand makes it legal. No man's debt gives him the right to sell a human being. I know that. Silas Harrow knew it the second he saw me. The question is whether this town knows it. She looked at Virgil. He was staring at the floor. His good hand was trembling. I'm done, she said. That's my story, all of it. I have told it once and I will not tell it again. It belongs to the record now, and the record doesn't forget. She walked back and sat down. Silas didn't touch her. He didn't need to. She could feel him beside her the way you feel a wall at your back. Solid, present, not moving. Morrow didn't ask for closing statements. Virgil Crane, he said, you are hereby charged and bound over for trial on all counts. The indenture document is declared null and void under territorial statute. Miss Crane is a free citizen of Wyoming Territory with full rights and protections under the law. Any attempt to contact, approach, or assert any claim over Miss Crane will result in immediate and indefinite imprisonment. Sheriff Haskell removed the defendant. Haskell took Virgil out. The door closed. The room exhaled. Edith Calloway stood up. She started clapping. Slow, deliberate, one woman clapping in a room full of people who weren't sure what they were supposed to do. Then Mrs. Harwell stood. Then the Cooper sisters. Then a rancher in the back that Letta didn't know. Then another. Then the room was full of a sound that Letta had never heard directed at her in her life. The sound of people standing up. She sat in her chair and let it wash over her. She didn't stand. She didn't wave. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed the way she always breathed when something enormous moved through her. Controlled, deliberate, holding still until the shape of the new world settled enough to walk through. They rode home in late afternoon. The mare was stronger now, rested and fed. Letta rode. Silas walked beside her with the Winchester across his back in the place where Jesse's rifle used to live. When they reached the ranch, the sign was still on the gatepost. The charcoal letters were fading in the weather but still legible. No one owns another. The barn was gone. What remained stood like a black skeleton against the sky. Charred posts and collapsed beams and the smell of ash that would take weeks to fade. Letta looked at it for a long time. We can rebuild, Silas said. With what? With the lumber that Edith brought. With the nails I pulled from the wreck. With the boards the women in town sent. With our hands and whatever daylight gives us. You're stubborn, she said. Been told that. By who? Everyone who's met me. She almost smiled. The muscles in her face moved closer to it than they had ever been. Not quite a smile. Not yet. But the architecture was there. The foundation. The readiness. They rebuilt, board by board, nail by nail. Letta learned to use a saw and discovered she had an eye for angles that made Silas's look approximate. She learned to shoot the Winchester, and by the second week she could hit a tin can at 50 yards, and by the third she was better than him, and neither of them mentioned it. Weeks passed. The barn rose, the fences held, the creek came back a little. Enough. One evening Letta sat on the porch and said his name. Silas. Yeah. What are we? He was quiet. He set the rifle against the porch rail and took off his hat and held it in both hands the way a man holds something when his hands need a task and there isn't one. What do you want us to be? He said. I asked first. Yeah, you did. He looked at the hat. I think we're two people who found each other at the worst possible time and somehow didn't make it worse. I think you're the bravest person I've known, and I include every man I served with at Antietam. She stepped closer. That's not an answer. It's the best I got. Then I'll give you a better one. She took another step. They were 2 feet apart, close enough that he could see the silver comb in her hair and the scar on her wrist and the way her gray eyes had something new in them. Not fear, not caution, something warmer, something with roots. I choose you, she said. Not because you saved me. You didn't save me. I saved myself the day I decided not to jump off that bridge. What you did was open a door. And what I'm doing now is walking through it. She held up her hand before he could speak. I choose you because you gave me a choice, because you slept in a barn, because you knocked on your own door, because you asked me what I thought and waited for the answer, because when I told you I'd burn your cabin down, you said fair enough, because you let me ride to town alone and you didn't follow. I wanted to follow, he said. I know. That's why it mattered that you didn't. Silas put his hat on, took it off, put it on again. His hands did not know what to do when they weren't holding a weapon or a hammer or a fence post. Are you saying I'm saying I'd like to stay? Not because I have nowhere else to go, because there's nowhere else I want to be. And when we're ready, when we're both ready, I'd like it to be more than staying. He looked at her. Letta, I've wanted that since you threatened to burn my house down. This time she did smile. A real one. The first one he had ever seen on her face. It changed everything. It broke her face open and let the light in and turned those hard gray eyes into something that looked like mourning. Don't get ahead of yourself, Silas Harrow. A girl likes to be asked proper. I'll work on that. You do that. She walked inside. He stood in the yard with his hat on crooked and the firelight from the cook pit throwing his shadow long across the dirt and the rebuilt barn solid behind him and the cabin door open in front of him. Always open. He asked her on a Sunday morning in August. She said no. Then she grinned wider than he'd ever seen her grin and said, I won't marry you, but I'll marry with you. There's a difference. You taught me that. The difference between for and with, between bought and freed, between owning and choosing. They were married under the cottonwood tree by the creek. Edith came. Mrs. Harwell came. The Cooper sisters came. Even Sheriff Haskell looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt. Morrow wrote from Cheyenne and wrote it out because he said he wanted to see how the story ended. Letta wore the gray dress and the silver comb. Silas wore his blue work shirt beneath his brown leather vest and his hat, which was crooked. A traveling preacher said the words. Letta said hers, Silas said his. When it was done, Letta took a piece of charcoal and walked to the gatepost. She crossed out the old sign. Beneath it she wrote in careful letters, Harrow and Crane Ranch. You kept your name, Silas said. I earned my name. I'm not giving it up. I wouldn't ask you to. I know. That's why I'm keeping it. That evening after the guests had gone and the dishes were washed and the chickens were settled and the mare was brushed and the barn door was closed and the cabin door was open, Letta sat at the table and wrote a letter. She wrote it slow, pressing hard in the careful handwriting of a person who is putting down words she needs to exist outside of herself. She folded it and put it in Jesse's wooden box beneath the photograph and the brass button and closed the latch. Silas found it months later on a cold morning when the first frost came and he went looking for his brother's photograph because he wanted to remember Jesse's face. He unfolded the letter and read it. Silas, you didn't save me. I need you to know that because the truth matters more than the story. You didn't save me. You opened a door. You stepped back. You gave me room to breathe and space to choose and time to remember that I was a person before Virgil made me a thing. That's not saving. That's something harder. That's trusting someone to save themselves and standing close enough to catch them if they fall. I stood on a bridge and decided to live. I stood in an auction yard and asked a stranger to buy me. I stood in a courtroom and said my story out loud to a room full of people who had never once asked to hear it. I stood in the yard and asked you to ask me. Every one of those was my choice, but every one was possible because you were standing nearby. Not in front of me, not behind me, beside me. That's where you've always been. That's where I want you to stay. Letta Crane Harrow. P.S. Tell Jesse I'm taking care of his comb. Silas folded the letter, put it back in the box, closed the latch, walked outside and stood in the yard and looked at the ranch. The barn that they'd built together, the fences that held, the sign on the gate, the cabin with the door that had never been locked and never would be, and the woman inside it who had chosen him. Not because she had to, not because there was nowhere else, because she wanted to, and wanting she had taught him was the only honest reason to stay. He straightened his hat, for once it sat right, and in Black Hollow Valley, Wyoming territory in the late summer of 1886 on a piece of land that wasn't worth much by any measure except the one that counted two people who had been broken by the world built, something the world said couldn't stand. Not a rescue, not a transaction, not a debt repaid or a bargain struck. A partnership, equal ground, shared labor, chosen.